Well, as I mentioned at the beginning of this Mass, today is a day that Australia's Catholic bishops and our National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Catholic Council have invited us to celebrate Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Sunday. So this is happening all around Australia as I speak. In particular, we're invited to acknowledge that God has been walking with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, making his presence known through a continuous living culture over many thousands of years. Having said that, we gather on this Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Sunday in the midst of a worldwide COVID-19 pandemic. Australia has not seen the last of it, and as we know, with Melbourne, Victoria struggling with this virus this very moment. The riots and protests in the United States of America following upon George Floyd's death have stirred up the world community as well. Again, Australia is not immune from this, with our own rallies taking place to focus our attention on Aboriginal deaths in custody and other challenges facing the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community. Dare I say, but the rise of China has also disturbed us in terms of what appears to be the act of a bully. North Korea has made itself known once more by blowing up a meeting place for the North and South to gather, to meet, to cooperate, to dialogue and to share. The list goes on, and yet we dare celebrate today together in the Spirit as we focus on Indigenous culture and story. My friends, in the Gospel we hear the consoling words of Jesus this morning, "Come to me, all you who labour and are overburdened, and I will give you rest." For me, these words could not have come at a better time. As citizens of the world, we're overburdened with all sorts of significant challenges that are producing, in my view, what could be described as a perfect storm. That is to say, we have a deeply disturbing convergence of issues that demand our careful reflection and prayerful remembrance. In terms of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples with whom the Church stands in solidarity, the situation is still a work in progress. But Christians have a special responsibility to walk with our Indigenous brothers and sisters, not ahead of them or behind them, but with them. In every sense, we're called to walk together, and as we do, if our ears and eyes are open, we will see that non-Indigenous people have not yet fully understood the serious level of disadvantage that still exists today. Perhaps at times like these, non-Indigenous Australians, and that's most of us, if not all of us, have presumed to know what Indigenous people need and want, and we've legislated or acted accordingly. That posture has not worked, and it's not working today. The famous Closing the Gap initiative, begun in response to a call for governments to commit to achieving equality for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in health and life expectancy within a generation. As I understand it, in 2020, there now seems to be a great emphasis on partnership between governments and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. At the centre of this new way of working is local action and a determination to make a difference and to achieve change. In our own city and beyond, we've been grappling with some life and death issues. I will not forget, and I'm sure you won't either, that terrible tragedy of those children recently on our own streets and the reports that followed concerning their background and circumstances. I suspect those children were traumatised because of a number of factors within their life. We can blame parents, and I've heard many do that, but that is not the answer by itself, unless we have systems and procedures in place that work to support families. The blame game has got to stop, and some conversation, serious ones, and I know attempts are being made with elders and Aboriginal leaders, need to happen in earnest. Our justice system also needs to be part of the equation. It is, of course, but governments must ensure that appropriate laws are drawn up to respond to the many and varied circumstances that our Indigenous brothers and sisters find themselves in. The gap that I mentioned a moment ago, whilst improved, because I've read a recent report in some areas, still points to a need to do more. It seems that even the church, and this might be hard to accept or swallow this morning, but it seems that even the church over the years has not always understood Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples either. Here in North Queensland, missionaries came to Aboriginal groups with very well-meaning men and women. They came to settle and set up medical clinics, farms and churches. Being convinced of the vital importance of the Christian message, they again perhaps sought with the best of intentions to convert the first peoples of this land to their Christian beliefs and own habits. Some tried to understand them, but for the most part, most didn't, because they believed they had the truth. It is said that for the most part, Indigenous spiritual beliefs and ceremonies were viewed as pagan, barbaric and evil. The sooner these were replaced with civilised Christianity, the better for all. That was part of the mentality of the time. Because many missionaries had this view, they promoted a European culture as superior, resulting in much confusion. So the rule of the missionaries in those early days was supported by the power of the government and the police force. The elders in Indigenous spirituality have a sacred responsibility as caretakers of the land and its resources, and because they could no longer exercise that care, they lost their purpose in life. A deep feeling that still exists today is that Indigenous people's core beliefs, what is at the heart of an Indigenous person? You talk to them and they'll talk about law, not L-A-W, but L-O-R-E. That's part of their DNA that I'm afraid we white fellas will never understand. Why wouldn't there be a feeling that their spirit is being crushed? The gospel, or good news brought by the missionaries, again with the best of intentions, was a positive message, but somehow it became perhaps compromised along the way. The Christian message was imposed from above without much dialogue with traditional culture and the spiritual tradition that was present long before the Christian missionaries came. So if anyone thinks these issues are easy to solve with black and white answers, then I'm afraid they are seriously deluded. As the discernment group for the Plenary Council has stated, the Church in Australia must be shaped by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture and spirituality for it to be authentically a church of this land. When the church sinks its roots deep into Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture, it will authentically be a church in the land with a new vision and energy for mission. We are the church, and all of us must sink deep roots into Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture. Otherwise, we betray our Christian call to respond to anyone in need. Our Indigenous brothers and sisters are in need, and our understanding and solidarity. We're not to patronise Indigenous peoples, but rather listen to them like we have never done before. They are disadvantaged, they are discriminated against, so may our understanding grow and mature, because for whatever has happened historically in our own country, this kind of feeling permeates the Indigenous culture, and it's sometimes too, as I see it anyway, passed on from one generation to another. The great tragedy, as I see, is that our elders, in this midst of change and passing on the traditions, our elders are either dying out or giving up. It's not their fault, it's just that's the way it is. So this present generation of Indigenous young people haven't got those mentors that perhaps they once had. So on this special day, we're invited to not judge, but to be understanding and to walk together in the Spirit. At this Eucharist, we come seeking consolation, do we not? Consolation of the Lord's presence as we taste and see the goodness of the Lord, a goodness that transcends division and misunderstanding with the power to reconcile and to love.